Let's play a game. Imagine two zip codes. In one, lush parks, sparkling clean air, and pristine streets greet you. In the other, towering smokestacks dominate the skyline, casting a perpetual haze. Children play amidst piles of discarded tires, their laughter muffled by the roar of nearby factories. This, my friends, is not a dystopian novel. It's the reality of environmental injustice. We live in a world where your postal code can predict your environmental destiny, where privilege buys clean air and organic kale, while poverty is served a cocktail of toxins and despair. It's a world where the burden of pollution falls heaviest on those least equipped to fight back: communities of color, indigenous groups, and the economically marginalized. This isn't about bad luck or unfortunate geography. It's about deliberate choices. Choices made by corporations who see profit in exploiting vulnerable communities. Choices made by governments that prioritize economic growth over the health of their citizens. And choices we all make when we turn a blind eye to the invisible lines that divide us. This is about environmental justice, the principle that all people, regardless of race, income, or zip code, deserve to live in a healthy environment. It's about recognizing that environmental degradation is not just an ecological problem, but a social justice issue rooted in systemic inequality. These invisible lines of inequality are etched deep into our social fabric. They determine who breathes clean air, who drinks clean water, and who bears the brunt of environmental hazards. These lines are drawn along the fault lines of race, class, and power, creating a world where environmental burdens are distributed with cruel precision. Take, for instance, the siting of hazardous waste facilities. It's no coincidence that these toxic neighbors often find themselves in the backyards of marginalized communities. These communities, often lacking the political clout or economic resources to resist, become dumping grounds for society's unwanted byproducts. The same pattern emerges in the distribution of green spaces. Wealthy neighborhoods boast sprawling parks and tree-lined streets, while low-income areas are starved of nature's bounty. This isn't just an aesthetic issue, it has real consequences for physical and mental health. Access to green spaces has been linked to lower stress levels, reduced obesity rates, and improved cognitive function. But for those living in concrete jungles, nature is a luxury they can't afford. Their children grow up breathing polluted air, playing on contaminated soil, and facing a future where environmental hazards are an inescapable reality. This is the brutal arithmetic of environmental injustice, where the poorest and most vulnerable pay the highest price. Maria lives in a small town dominated by a coal-fired power plant. Her son Miguel suffers from asthma. Every time the plant coughs out its black plume, Maria watches Miguel struggle for breath. Her story is not unique. Across the globe, millions of people live in the shadow of polluting industries, their lives circumscribed by the rhythm of industrial emissions. For these communities, pollution is not an abstract concept. It's the stench that permeates their homes, the dust that settles on their children's toys, the persistent cough that lingers long after the factory gates have closed. It's a constant, insidious presence that erodes their health and steals their future. In the face of such overwhelming odds, these communities often find themselves engaged in a David and Goliath struggle against powerful corporations and indifferent governments. They organize protests, file lawsuits, and demand accountability. They are the frontline warriors in the battle for environmental justice, fighting for their right to breathe, to live, and to dream of a better future. The price of environmental injustice is measured not just in dollars and cents, but in human lives. It's measured in the increased incidence of respiratory illnesses, cancers, and developmental disabilities. It's measured in the lost productivity, the soaring healthcare costs, and the shortened lifespans. But the true cost of injustice is far greater than any economic metric can capture. It's the erosion of trust, the fracturing of communities, and the perpetuation of cycles of poverty and despair. It's the slow, grinding process of dehumanization that occurs when people are treated as disposable, their lives deemed less worthy of protection. This is the moral bankruptcy of environmental injustice. It's a system that values profit over people, that sacrifices the well-being of the vulnerable for the benefit of the privileged. It's a system that demands radical transformation. Section 5, Environmental Racism, a Toxic Legacy. Environmental racism is a particularly insidious form of environmental injustice where communities of color are disproportionately burdened by environmental hazards. This isn't just a coincidence, but a product of historical and ongoing discrimination. From the legacy of redlining, which relegated black communities to less desirable and more polluted areas, to the continued siting of toxic facilities in minority neighborhoods, environmental racism is a pervasive force that shapes the lived experiences of millions. The consequences of this systemic bias are devastating. Black children are 3 times more likely to die from asthma than white children. Indigenous communities face disproportionate exposure to toxic waste and contamination from extractive industries, and Latino farm workers suffer higher rates of pesticide poisoning and heat-related illnesses. Environmental racism is a stain on our collective conscience, a stark reminder that the fight for environmental justice is inextricably linked to the fight for racial justice. Section 6. Flint, Michigan, a crisis ignored. Flint, Michigan stands as a chilling testament to the consequences of environmental racism and government neglect. In 2014, the city switched its water source to the Flint River, a decision driven by cost-cutting measures. The result was a catastrophic public health crisis. The corrosive river water, inadequately treated, leached lead from aging pipes, poisoning the city's water supply. Thousands of children were exposed to dangerously high levels of lead, leading to developmental problems, learning disabilities, and other health issues. Flint's water crisis was not simply a failure of infrastructure, but a failure of empathy. It was a failure to recognize the humanity of a predominantly black community, a community deemed expendable in the pursuit of austerity. Section 7. The intersectionality of injustice. Environmental justice is not a standalone issue. It intersects with a web of social, economic, and political injustices. Poverty, lack of access to healthcare, and political disenfranchisement all exacerbate the vulnerability of communities facing environmental hazards. This intersectionality of injustice demands a holistic approach to solutions. We cannot address environmental degradation without tackling the root causes of inequality. We cannot achieve environmental justice without achieving social justice. Recognizing this interconnectedness is essential for building a truly just and sustainable future. It requires breaking down silos, building coalitions across movements, and understanding that the fight for a healthy planet is inseparable from the fight for a more just and equitable society. Section 8. Climate change. The great equalizer. Climate change is often framed as a universal threat, impacting everyone equally. But this is a dangerous misconception. While climate change affects us all, it does not affect us all equally. The impacts of climate change are felt most acutely by those who are already most vulnerable, those living in poverty, in coastal communities, and in regions susceptible to drought and extreme weather events. These communities often lack the resources to adapt to a changing climate, making them more susceptible to displacement, food insecurity, and climate-related disasters. Climate change acts as a threat multiplier, exacerbating existing inequalities and creating new forms of injustice. It's a stark reminder that the transition to a low-carbon future must be rooted in principles of equity and justice. Section 9. Building a just and sustainable future. Building a just and sustainable future requires a fundamental shift in our values, priorities, and systems. It requires dismantling the structures of inequality that perpetuate environmental injustice, and embracing a vision of a world where all people have the right to thrive. This means investing in renewable energy and sustainable agriculture, creating green jobs, and ensuring that the benefits of a clean energy economy are shared equitably. It means prioritizing community-led solutions, empowering marginalized communities, and ensuring that those most impacted by environmental degradation have a voice in shaping the future. Building a just and sustainable future is not a utopian dream, it's a necessity. It's the only way to ensure a livable planet for ourselves and future generations. Section 10. A call to action. From awareness to action. From awareness is the first step, but it's not enough. We must move from awareness to action, from outrage to engagement. We must demand accountability from our elected officials, challenge corporate greed, and support grassroots movements fighting for environmental justice. We can start by educating ourselves about the environmental challenges facing our communities, supporting organizations working on the front lines, and advocating for policies that prioritize environmental justice. We can make conscious choices in our daily lives, reducing our own environmental footprint and supporting businesses that operate ethically and sustainably. The fight for environmental justice is a fight for our collective future. It's a fight for a world where every child can breathe clean air, drink clean water, and live in a healthy environment. It's a fight we cannot afford to lose. Section 11. Hope in the face of adversity. The scale of the challenges we face can feel overwhelming, but despair is not an option. Amidst the stark realities of environmental injustice, there is hope. Hope in the resilience of communities fighting for their right to a healthy environment. Hope in the growing awareness of the interconnectedness of social and environmental issues, and hope in the power of collective action to create a more just and sustainable future. The fight for environmental justice is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires sustained effort, unwavering commitment, and a belief in the possibility of a better world. It's a fight that demands our attention, our energy, and our unwavering resolve. It's a fight we can win together. That's our show, folks. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to Freedom's Voice for a fresh perspective on today's issues.